Yes. Okay, well, good evening everybody, and welcome to the Leeds Combined Arts Mind, Body, Spirit evening for May. And we're very pleased and very proud to have Claire Rae Randall, who is actually one of our members as well, talking about her book, Waking the Monkey. And I'll start with a small apology. We did actually put the wrong title on when we sent the email out. We put The 100th Monkey, which is actually the subtitle. The book is entitled Waking the Monkey, and the subtitle is The 100th Monkey. So apologies to Claire about that, but we've got it right now. So okay, well, I'll hand over to Claire then. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you very much, Carol. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Carol and Leeds Combined Arts for inviting me to launch this book of mine, which has taken a very, very, very long time to come to fruition. It's based on events that actually took place 20 years ago, this summer, and probably the best way to introduce it is to actually quote a short piece from what the organiser of the original 100th Monkey Camp, which this is based on, said after he'd read my manuscript. I'll be saying a bit more about this, but anyway, he said about this, he said, "To many people, what we are up to, they will never have thought of before, and the story will seem quite amazing." This is the camp of the 100th Monkey in 1995. Yet, Claire's rendering of it is pretty close to what happened, and it is the only record of these events that exists. And he there wishes me well with it. Well, before I get any further into it, I'd just like to ask, who here is familiar with the term, the 100th monkey? Reasonable, about maybe 40% of the people here. Would anybody like to venture an explanation, or shall we just leave it at that, and shall I have to take responsibility for this one? Right, well, the 100th monkey is a term that came about as a result of some work that a man called Ken Keyes did about 60 years ago now, I think it was. And he found that they were studying monkeys off the coast of Japan. They lived on little islands, and it was found that new behaviours would spread amongst the population. And they noticed one particular example where a young female monkey started cleaning and washing the sweet potatoes that the experimenters would give to the monkeys, thereby making them nicer to eat. And washing them in the sea salt, actually, they probably got more flavour as well as getting rid of the sand and grit off them. And then all but the very oldest of the monkeys picked up this behaviour over a period of time. Then, this is the postulate, the monkeys on the next island, without any behavioural contact, started doing the same thing. So this is where the concept of the 100th monkey come from. Obviously the number 100 is purely speculative. But the idea is, it's fundamentally what you would call a Jungian concept, which relies on the concept of collective universal mind, and then humans have a collective unconscious. Japanese macaque monkeys, or whatever they were, they will have their own collective mind. And so this has led to a whole realm of subject matter in metaphysical thought that how does one affect these things? Can you intensify this by doing different things like different meditational acts and so on and so forth? So this is the kind of philosophical background to the 100th Monkey Camp. One of the things that Paul Jenkins, who set this up, was concerned with was trying to tap into this idea with the idea of healing world conflicts. I probably, if I just get into reading a bit from the introduction, I can probably say it better than kind of ad-libbing. So, I'll also give you a flavour of how I'm approaching this. I first became aware of the experiment in consciousness known as 100th Monkeying in early 1995 when I received a flyer through the post from Paul Jenkins, the editor of the first edition of The Only Planet of Choice, a book which purported to be channeled from archetypal beings and which discussed the difficult problems we face on Earth from a spiritual perspective. Archetypal thought beings may be seriously outside the box for most people in the West, but until comparatively recently, a belief in angelic and divine beings was universal, and the magical, animistic universe was a part of that worldview, still surviving in religions to this day. I had met Paulden on November the 4th, 1993, when I attended a talk that he gave at the Friends Meeting House in North Leeds on the subject of extraterrestrials, having been interested in the subject of ET contact for some years, but I had only read about it and not had first-hand experience of the phenomenon, or so I thought. I had pretty much forgotten Carl Jung's later work, in which he argues that the UFO phenomenon could be modern humanity's interpretation of deeper spiritual realities, putting them into a contemporary frame. You can see the science fiction references. Paulden began to join the dots of depth psychology, spirituality, and animism into a coherent gestalt of a larger universe beyond the materialist reductionism that is, I believe, frankly, responsible for much of the present world crisis. One of the things about this, which is a kind of continuous background to this, is synchronicity. Now, that's another subject which Carl Jung explored in his later years. We live, commonly, we understand ourselves to live in a causal universe, even if quantum physics has somewhat displaced Newton's total primacy. Nonetheless, we do live in a world which is pretty predictable in Newtonian terms. But, so this is a linear, kind of billiard ball idea of reality. And what Carl Jung is suggesting is a kind of lateral, what he calls an acausal connecting principle, so that everything that happens in one particular moment, or which is connected by conceptual links, can be drawn into what he would call a synchronistic net. So I'm really, really pleased that we have someone in the audience who heard about this and is a relative of Paulden Jenkins. So I thought that was quite kind of a wonderful affirmation that this is tapping somewhere into a collective mind. Well, hopefully. So we've got, what I'm trying to do here, I'm going to try and set up what is a different, reality view from our contemporary world. You've heard about magical realism, you know, Harry Potter and all that. Well, for this, I am coining the term metaphysical realism. Because one of the things that I want to get back to here, and this was what really attracted me about the 100th Monkey Camp, was that the idea of trying to get a meditational group of people together who could, in some way, make an impact on the collective mind of the planet. I mean, it's a pretty mind-boggling idea, but it is not entirely without scientific justification. For instance, I don't know how many people here have heard of Rupert Sheldrake. Oh, yes, oh, yeah, well, yes, good, good. And so you'll probably be familiar with his idea of a morphic field, which you could describe as a kind of template on some kind of etheric or astral level that exists independent of merely material objects. Also, there is a marvellous experiment which Rupert Sheldrake has done, which I believe really works on the same fundamental background as what we were trying to get into with this camp. Some years ago, Rupert Sheldrake did an experiment called Dogs Who Know When Their Masters Are Coming Home. I'll see one or two heads nodding there. And what he found was a lot of dog owners particularly say that their dogs know when they're coming home. So Rupert Sheldrake got a number of these dog owners and their dogs, and he set up synchronized video recorders so that he's tape recording the home where Granny is sitting reading the newspaper, the dog is sitting quietly by the fire, and then having a randomized, the experimenter go with the dog's owner and having a randomized time alarm going off so that nobody knows when it's going to go off. They go off and have tea somewhere for up to 5 or 10 hours. So basically the dog doesn't know when the person's coming back. This is well out of the dog's hearing, 5-10 miles away. And then the alarm goes off. The experimenter says, well, it's time to get home now. And the synchronized video of the dog shows the dog immediately, whether it's 100 miles away or 200 yards down the street. In other words, the dog is not bothered by the distance. The dog is merely tuned into the master and knows that the master has decided to come home at that particular moment. It's quite remarkable. You can see the videos on YouTube. So we're really getting into a new paradigm here where we are in a what you might call a medium of infinite consciousness, and each one of us are like receiver and transmitter beacons within this, and those people or pets that we're particularly well tuned to can know there's something going on. So one of the things about the camp was that it was, so we were trying to get into this, we were going to meditate about world problems as they were, the world problems that existed in 1995, such as Bosnia, the brutal military dictatorship in Nigeria, the Mururoa atomic testing, and a couple of others. And so we wanted to, as it says at the beginning, it is an experiment in consciousness. So we were trying to do something, but at the same time it was kind of a step into the unknown. Experiments had found that groups doing meditation in high crime areas in America in the early 80s, there was an experimental study done, and it was found that there was a statistical correlation of lower crime during the periods when meditation was taking place in these anonymous warehouses or wherever they took place. So that's another interesting feed into this, where so we've got this kind of backdrop of the consciousness field. We're meditating, focusing on these different conflict situations around the planet. And again, it's very speculative because it's very difficult to know what might come of these things. And there was a strange coincidence that happened with one of these, which I'll get on to in a bit. And so we're doing this, and one of the important things about it was that it was completely in a kind of isolated bubble, like a hothouse, separated from the world. We had no alternating currents, which is quite an incredible thing really in our modern world. It was just before mobile phones took over our world. So we were actually in quite what would be virtually an unattainable kind of pristine vibrational environment. And we were also doing different group work on personal material and what you might call spiritual guides and meditations. So it was an extremely concentrated week that we're going through. It was a little bit like a kind of monastery or something. You know, it was separated from all, you know, we didn't know what was going on. One or two little snippets came through because we had to have, you know, supply lines and so forth. But of course, one of the very interesting things that happened is that when you're doing this kind of quite intensive work and spending a lot of time meditating away from TV, news media and so on and so forth, you get more into your own inner perceptions and feelings, and strange things can start happening. And I found myself in a strange situation where something that might have normally seemed quite a minor thing suddenly activated all my triggers, pressed all my buttons, and I was just so, I had to deal with it somehow. And it put me through what I have since discovered. I've since discovered about Joseph Campbell. I think some people might have heard of Joseph Campbell, and I discovered recently, I'm quite glad I didn't discover this before because it probably would have affected what I'd written, that this does actually fit the story arc of similar. It's an arc which writers tend to model their stories on, in terms of a novice setting out on their journey, finding an old wise person who helps them, then they get into a journey, some catastrophe happens, they set back, and then they have to overcome their difficulties. And this seemed to be what I found myself being put through. And I'll read out the slightly dramatic situation I found myself in. But perhaps it's only by knowing, but only becoming foolish and accepting our own foolishness that we can perhaps gain a different view of ourselves. So this is how the chapter 0, the Fool, starts, where I step over the edge. This is actually interposed from the middle of the book. I am the fool, I said. the fool who stumbles into your circles without warning. That didn't come out as I intended. Help. I had meant to say, I'm the fool who stumbled into your circle last night. I could almost discern the capital letter which the word fool demanded, with all the associations of card 0 of the tarot and the medieval fools of courtly fame. I am the fool who stumbles into your circles without warning, that old trickster. And this was what seemed to be happening, that there was unconscious energy coming out of me and putting me through stuff I simply didn't understand. But I was very, very fortunate that there was a lot of structure in the camp, and there were various kind of, you might call them almost shamanic people there who seemed to be working on a different kind of level to the normal considerations that we have in daily life. And I'm just going to introduce you to one. This is the first morning after I just arrived. It was bright, the sunshine beginning to burn through the early haze. The sun rode above the line of the Malverns. They floated in a sea of mist, reminding me of Glastonbury Tor earlier that summer. In the flat of the vale where we sat, only trees broke through the dense white fleece, becoming ever more wan until the distance swallowed them. The total absence of mechanical noise allows perceptions that would otherwise be screened out. Birdsong filled the air, and the mist sparkled in the brilliance. I was already feeling energised by my surroundings. Smoke was rising from the fire at the gate. Tea! It was the balmy Swami, stirring a cup as I approached. In the daylight I could see that the night before we had been sitting on an old three-piece suite, arrayed around the fire pit, as if this were perfectly normal. There was the slight air of a Harold Pinter production about it. A plank on the ground acted as table for the cups, milk and teapot. He may have had the most outlandish appearance, only amplified in the daylight, but he clearly had a very English sense of priorities when it mattered. I gratefully received the proffered mug of hot brew and knelt down to warm the fire. So there was quite an arc of development, because as the camp began, we were all kind of new and we were getting into this sort of doing these meditations, and then we gradually seemed to move into this kind of metaphysical or symbolic realm where things seemed to develop into a deeper level of meaning. And this was the movement into what you might call a vibrational level, where we were in touch with the deeper aspects of ourselves, and we get into this Jungian level of reality, where we would put ourselves through the alchemical process of, in alchemy, you wrote quite extensively on this, the alchemist puts their prima materia, which is their basically themselves, it's a symbolic journey into the crucible. It's heated up, it gives off essences, and it's refined. And this is actually what the thing about alchemy is, everybody used to think, oh, it's about making gold and people wanting to be rich and all that. But actually, it's finding your true path. It's about finding your inner strength and confidence. And so what I found was that while this was going on at different levels, we were meditating on different subjects around the world, and at the same time, as we were getting in touch with these other ideas, we were also putting pressure, as you might say, on our own inner processes. And what I found was that it distilled out from me an essence of self-doubt, and so I had to go through a process of overcoming this. And so there are so many different levels that it's working on. On the personal level, I was going through my own rite of passage, my own vision quest, as some might call it. At the same time, this was set in the context of the camp, which is about trying to effect world healing, some kind of world transformation through the focus of what you might call a critical mass of focused attention and concentration. And so what I thought was really interesting was that while we're all focusing on the world, at the same time it's having a kind of reflexive interaction on ourselves, a bit like Newton's laws, where for each action is an opposite reaction. So I'll just, I think probably time for a little bit more reading. Oh yes, this is the one. Yes, page 178, I think this is the next one. Yes, and this is an experience I had sitting in the meditation tent, because one of the processes that we would go through is that in the morning we would have a meditation on a particular subject, the subject we introduced, usually by Palden. We would meditate on a particular subject, and then we would, after having a short break, we'd all come back and sit for about 2 hours with what's known as a talking stick. I think probably people have heard of talking stick circle, and it was called an alting, which is the same as Althingi, which is the Icelandic parliament. It's the ancient Norse circle for speaking all things. It's the council people take, and so we would pass around the stick, and while one person's holding the stick, everybody else has to stay silent, and they can only speak when it is passed to them, and so the stick will go around. And it's a very interesting exercise in concentration, but sometimes concentration might wander. A tiny movement caught my eye. Crawling on the black of my legging was a minuscule green insect. I bent down for a closer look and saw that it was like a microscopic grasshopper. At another time I might have simply ignored it or even brushed it away, but I had been opened to more perceptions and realities in the short space I had been in that place, and so chose to look closer. I wondered if it might be aware of me as anything more than a stone or a log that it might walk on as a hill is to us. I reached out with my mind and asked it, "You are in this circle too. Have you come to tell me anything?" There was no reply in words. However, my thoughts told me what it was I needed to know. This tiny creature was not a being in isolation. I moved out the focus of my attention and saw that it was only one amongst countless billions, trillions even, of creatures all working ceaselessly, tirelessly to maintain our world. From the smallest microbe to the largest tree, all organisms supported and contributed to the whole, producing the building blocks of life, consuming them, feeding itself, and creating ever more complex systems and conditions. I felt the gigantic biological machine of life on planet Earth as it stretched away from me around the globe. I saw that it existed for billions of years and was seamless in its growth and perpetuation. How we as humans depend upon the service that these beings give to us in sustaining our own life, that we are indeed a part of this machine, that all life on our beautiful planet is intertwined, interdependent, and that the processes which constitute its being are a manifestation and a description of the mind of God. The biological machine is part, in its turn, of the greater material structure of the planet itself, which had come into being as a result of the laws and nature of material existence. My little grasshopper did not need to speak to me about the affairs of humans, for it knew nothing of our ways, but by understanding its own nature, I could see its place in the world, how it functioned and contributed to the whole. All beings exist for themselves, but also are part of something more. I felt humbled to understand how this immense carpet of life allowed me to exist. We humans are not outside of this. Perhaps we have lost our way within its intimate and intricately woven pathways. The chattering monkeys were a noise in the background. They could bemoan their guilt, scold each other, and quarrel. But if it did not help them see who they were and what they needed to be doing for the good of the great organism of which we are all cells, then they were doing no more than babble. The human condition is indeed a paradox. Emerging from billions of years of evolution, we are the universe looking back at itself. But we have lost touch with the fact that we are indeed that universe which we look at. We have become fascinated with the bizarre idea that it is all a chance occurrence which has no meaning, while every day we are confronted with miracles beyond the capacity of humans to imagine or invent, and we find ourselves at the very centre of this performance. Shakespeare told us that all the world's a stage, and when we look at the props and scenery which create the illusion on stage, is it more important to know how they work, their pulleys and mechanisms, or to understand why they are there and the meaning of the stories they allow to be told? The great machine of life is the scenery and mechanism of the stage, and interesting it is to know how it works, if only so that we know why not to damage it. But we can ask questions about it and understand beyond that mere mechanism. In so doing, we create dimensions beyond the material plane, involuted realms of mind where questions which cannot be answered elsewhere are explored in order to understand the purpose of the machine. The universe reflects on its own nature and how different perspectives and viewpoints within it can create such diverse feelings and attitudes in the beings which have them. So there's a lot of discussion on metaphysics, meaning and life and purpose, and also the problem of evil. I'm so sorry, there's somebody I was talking to the other day who was interested in this subject. Unfortunately, he's not there, he's not here tonight. This is one of the things that I think is, well, as I say, I coined the phrase metaphysical realism because it's the way that it works is that it's working on the acausal synchronistic connecting principles. We take the pulleys and levers of the stage for granted, but it's the meaning of the actions and how we explore all these levels of meta-realities. I've just put down here what you might say are the essence of the pathway in the book, which I'm advocating, which is think for yourself. If I had been afraid to think for myself, none of this would have happened. Speak your truth. I think that one of the things that's very important to me is that we somehow find a way of bringing our truth into the world, and not in a way that is so much about conflicting or destroying what is around, because there's a lot of political ferment and everything these days, and I was involved with the Occupy movement, but in the end it's these political movements are more about changing the other side than they are about their own creativity and self-empowerment. And so this was, paradoxically, the opposite from what I anticipated from the camp, because we were all expecting to kind of get together and get into some kind of beautiful, harmonious, spiritual relationship where we would all meditate on things and we would all understand them. And it's amazing how actually the path of spiritual progress is so often completely different from that. It's all muddy and conflict, and then when you come out the end you think, well, if it had all been just so beautiful and serene and everything, we'd have never unearthed those particular gems that we found, and we would never have found our feeling of strength and confidence by having overcome certain conflicts or faced certain challenges between people in the relationships that you evolve in the camp. Yes, so really it's about fighting chaos within ourselves. This is what the pathway through led me to, because it was my own chaos that led me into my own disempowerment that led me into these conflicts. And so only when I'd actually faced those things within myself was I actually able to look back at them and find a confidence which I hadn't had before. It's not a, it's never, the end is never told, as they say. But it is my belief that only by overcoming these demons within ourselves can we actually have the wisdom to make a constructive mark on the world So originally, for many, many years, I was fascinated by the concept of the mass enlightenment of humanity. And when I went to the 100th Monkey Camp, I thought, that's it, we're going to create a spiritual centre of gravity, which will be like the 100th monkey, and everybody will pick up and it will all move on, and it will spread out like wonderful ripples. I've since realised then that it's a lot more complicated than that. But it all starts with the individual, and it was probably too much to expect that 128 people, as it turned out to be, would actually all come into some kind of harmonious psycho-spiritual vibration that would affect other people, other parts of the world who would feel it, and they would have this wonderful sense of peace and everything. And of course, it didn't happen like that. But the seed of transformation, of course, has to start within ourselves, within our own individual hearts, and we have to really look at ourselves and go through these things and really face those demons in the eye before we can actually become our own truly empowered spiritual warrior, I guess I would say. I'm just wondering, how's the time going? How am I?
You're all right for another. It's 8:15.
Yeah.
41 minutes.
We could have a break about 25 past, and then people, yeah, that's all right.
Well, I think probably time for some more reading. I have heard about the Barney Swami, but I haven't really read enough out yet, so I think I'll read out a little bit more for you here. Yes, right. We're sitting around the campfire with this old hippie called Barney Swami, and he says, "I'm glad to be here at this camp. It's great fun and an adventure. But this whole thing of affecting the world, trying to change it through meditation and sending out vibes, is all wrong. How so?" I asked. "The world needs to change. It's in such a bad way." "Oh yeah, but it's back to front. The right-hand path and the left-hand path. The right-hand path is supposed to be the path of goodness and morality, doing what is right, ordering the world, overcoming evil, and the left-hand path is supposed to be evil because it focuses on the personal path. But how can we know what is right for others? We can only know what is right for ourselves, and even then we can make mistakes, but at least if we do, we are the ones who must take the consequences. And if we accept responsibility, we will learn from it. Trying to order the world to our will, our idea of what it should be like, what we think others should do, is essentially black magic. We can only change the world to benefit as an extension of ourselves, something that grows out of ourselves, expands into the void, rather than trying to change what is already out there, competing or conflicting with it. If it is better, then it will supersede it. Our mice-like mammalian ancestors didn't outcompete the dinosaurs. They were just better adapted when things changed. As they say, the meese shall inherit the earth. I chuckled and groaned at the pun. But the meditations aren't about intervening, imposing solutions. They're about watching, opening up to what is happening, at most offering some kind of help. Technically, that is true, but there is too much emphasis on agreement. There are fine lines between the different approaches to these things. Observe, help, decide, stick your oar in. Buddhist monks may be able to watch and refrain from judging, but most people can't help taking some kind of attitude. I've heard feedback from some of the altings. There's always some disagreement rather than acceptance. People want to feel they are right. It's hard to accept that you don't have a complete view, that your opinion is a limited perspective. If the right-hand path is the path of righteousness, then it has to be the path of personal development. This will involve service, of course, because we are all part of the whole and must give at least as much as we take. Be in balance with the world. But the self-denial and abnegation that some teach, the submission to the will of the many, that's a mistake. It only serves those who teach it in order to covertly control others. You see religions, politically correct, the guilt trippers who try to undermine and weaken people like sheep so they can have more to themselves. That's the left-hand path, the path of egoic separation and domination through manipulation and will. It wants to make people doubt themselves, their own feelings, their self-worth. It justifies itself by saying it is fighting evil, a crusade, but even at the most sincere level, it's only against the projection of what it should first deal with in itself. Self-righteousness, it creates its own opposition. Let those who are without sin cast the first stone. If you take the splinter out of another's eye, first take the plank out of your own. Take responsibility for yourself, and you'll be more forgiving to others. It's a misunderstanding to see personal power as selfish and evil. I don't mean power over another. I mean power within yourself, strength, self-knowledge. There is this terrible misconception that personal fulfillment is wrong, that we should all give ourselves up and lose our identities for the sake of the greater good. Put everything before ourselves. What is the greater good except for us? How can we hope to improve the world except through being better and more powerful people ourselves? Even Buddhist enlightenment is a path of self-realization. To control the world is actually sorcery. You can't control the world. Not only is it too big, but how can we say what is right for the rest of the world? Trying to control the world is the path of supreme ego, forging the universe into the image of oneself. The path of enlightenment is the path of giving yourself to the world. You can only do what is truly right for the world if you do what is truly right for yourself, or in your power. Know thyself, as the ancient oracles said. Control and determine yourself, your own pathway of evolution, rather than the world outside. And in that way, you can externalize and manifest that change in the world. Gandhi had it. He said, be the change that you wish to see. That is the true path of the spiritual adept, to work on themselves rather than on the world. The world is only a reflection that we see of ourselves. All prophecies are self-fulfilling. We manifest what we believe. This is the path of the alchemist, self-refinement. So, we had a case of different views, and it was very constructive to see, on the one hand, you've got all this world meditation going on the other hand, you've got people standing outside it and exploring their own paths, and I guess that's the way that it's always going to be. But certainly what I got out of this was a development in my own path, which this was a kind of catalyst and starting gun to many, many changes which took place in my life afterwards, and the essence being putting energy in and rising to meet challenges, because I think a lot of people waiting for something to happen in the world, waiting for some political party to take over, some political movement, some awareness, some external thing. And I think we've all been there, but we have to put the energy actually into ourselves to raise our own inner energy level, because otherwise it will never manifest in the world except through our own putting that energy in, our own raising ourselves up a quantum level, a bit like the Teilhard de Chardin metaphor of the noosphere, which is like as we boil, as water boils at 100 degrees and water molecules come off, then this is what Teilhard de Chardin thought of as the awakening of humanity. And just as I said that the awakening of humanity has to come one person at a time rather than all in a flash. There, I think that's a little bit like the individual water molecules boiling off in Teilhard de Chardin's image. I think I'll just leave it there, and we can have a break and a cup of tea, and then I'll come back, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. And there's a map of the camp on there if anyone wants to have a look at that when we make the tea. We're going to start the second part. So it's question and answer session. If anybody's got any questions about the book or the camp or anything like that, okay?
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, the thing is, there is so much to tell about the camp. 470 pages or something like that. We covered so many things, so many different types of meditation, that it's hard to kind of encapsulate it all. So, fire away about those things that you thought you were going to hear about, but you didn't, or you wanted to, or whatever.
The thing I'd like to know is it possible for us all tonight to have some kind of small experience of that?
Why can we not utilise the group that we've got tonight and do
that's
a quick meditation maybe?
It's very interesting.
With a focus for world peace? Or?
Well, I'm just not sure we have enough preparation for this, perhaps.
What about intention though? If there's enough of us with the right intention,
well,
that's
yes.
what matters.
Well, I should point out, I mean, this is definitely something which, the thing is, one of the most important things we definitely discovered at the 100th Monkey Camp is that it's a jolly hard job to get everybody with the same intention. In fact, some of the kind of more interesting challenges and conflict that took place in the camp was a result of the fact that we didn't all, as I said before, you know, if we'd all just had a kind of, you know, blissed out time and everybody had said how wonderful it was and we'd all had this wonderful feeling of peace and forgiven everything and the world had been wonderful, then, you know, it probably wouldn't have changed much. And as I was saying to this gentleman in the break time, that sometimes we need to have the universe give us a little jog, shall we say, or knock a little bit off us to move us, because I mean, Sheldrake morphic fields are wonderful, but I sometimes say that we can easily get too stuck in our own morphic field, and we have to keep kind of evolving it, and so we find out, you know, the differences are as interesting as the shared things. So I would be concerned that we might, some of us, you know, have different ideas about what intentions we would like for the world, and that would be a whole kind of new kind of
It'd be the camp all over again.
Well, yes, you can vicariously relive it by reading the book, and you can go through all my highs and lows and my utter despair and my complete mental collapse, just by proxy, and come out at the end of it, and not have to experience so much conflict. I hope that doesn't sound like I'm kind of avoiding it, but the thing is, I don't really know what everybody else thinks about this. I mean, it's an interesting idea, and I'm obviously just wanting to talk about the concepts in the book and stuff, and I don't think people really expected to get involved in any group work and stuff. Challenging and interesting though the idea might be.
Maybe it's something you could set up for another day or something.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if anybody who's interested in that idea, they could maybe talk with you afterwards, and then something like that can be.
I just want to say.
Well, I found myself thinking about it, while we were talking, because I think it's certainly a good idea, to sort of encourage people, to do it even in small groups, just so long as the people in that group, as you say, have the same intention and the focus is,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I definitely.
I just want to say, I'm familiar.
Yes.
Meditation to me is when there's a spiritual guide, whether it's Buddhist or Christian. That's what meditation is to me, because otherwise it doesn't work. I think. I've been to Buddhist meditations and they work very well actually, because there's a certain structure in it. And there has to be, because for everybody to gain something from it.
Yes.
If you just let loose, as you say, get into your inner demons, you don't have to deal with them.
That's right. Yes. Well, I should have said perhaps that the daily meditations, there was actually a form was suggested to us through Palden, but from these supposedly archetypal beings. And the meditation form, well, I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment actually, but the meditational form that they gave was to tune into a particular situation. It might be Bosnia or the nuclear tests as they were happening at the time. And see if you could kind of just imagine or observe anything that was taking place there. I mean, you might be projecting, but nonetheless you're still projecting your own images which you picked up from the collective world around you. And then the idea was to just observe and see if there was anything in your own mind that changed by simply observing it. Witnessing something that might be witnessing some bad thing happen that and obviously this is all, it's kind of all speculative, it's all in your mind, but what I found was interesting was that obviously how it works on you to be contemplating these things, because who knows whether this person that you're imagining really exists, or there's no way you can find out really. So it is an exercise of working on your own mind and your own precepts and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So and also we did actually, the group that I was in actually a group of about a dozen, and we worked with a meditational teacher called Roger Keenan, who was absolutely amazing, and he had a sort of he was really good at getting us into kind of visionary trances. It was quite amazing really, and he would lead us through these archetypal, what some people would call path workings, symbolic journeys, which are a bit like the mystery schools of the Gnostics or the alchemists, where you have a series of archetypal images that trigger associations in your mind. And I think this was a very big part of actually, kind of my own process that I went through, because it was a kind of like a learning exercise, self-development exercise, to go through certain archetypal journeys, and explore your own responses.
Is it all I mentioned in the book?
It's all in the book.
Yeah.
Yes, there are. In fact, I give a credit in the acknowledgements to Roger Keenan because Roger Keenan for his wonderful meditations and his generous permission to use near verbatim accounts of his guided meditations. So there are, well, there was a couple of other things we did other than these guided meditations, but there are 4 or 5 lengthy, detailed guided meditations that you could probably use for yourself. I'm hoping people will. There's certainly, you know, interesting, imaginative journeys to go through. And I hope those will be some of the parts that people will like best.
Yeah. And you talk about what you want, how you want the world to develop. Ultimately, you've got your ideas in the book, what you want from the world and what sort of future you want. Is it all that mentioned in your aspirations?
Well, there's actually, I mean, one of the things is that one thing I've learned over the last 20 years is things rarely turn out the way that you expect them to. There is actually, I mean, one of the fascinating things about this is it's taken me 20 years since the camp happened to get this, to bring this to fruition. There is actually going to be some kind of reunion gathering at the end of the summer. It's not formally as a reunion, but it's just the same group of people getting together. And we actually did a meditation at the end of the camp, the whole circle, the whole camp, all 100 and whatever people, meditating on what the world will be like in 20 years' time, 2015.
Do you have anything in the book about artificial intelligence? Because we live now in a tremendous technological advance.
Yes.
There's a great danger that it could take over humanity.
Yeah.
Well, not exactly, but there is a chap who I'm still friends with, who I saw a few months ago actually, who is, he's a super techno geek, and I met him at the camp and we've had this very interesting kind of conversation over many years because he's very interested in this stuff you're talking about, and he's still trying to develop a particular, what you could call a kind of psychic interface with a computer. But so I have lots of conversations with this chap, and so we've got stuff coming from lots of different angles. We've got somebody who's come from a super science kind of cybernetic thing, you know, feeding in information to my general process, and we've got Roger giving us teachings about kind of based on Hermetic teachings, and then there's the wider group circle that everybody's allowed to join in, which is the more general meditations. And I mean, there's so much that took place in the camp that I don't even get to mention about, because there were several other subgroups who had afternoon types of meditation and stuff that I hardly knew anything about, because I was so involved in my own process, and I dare say everybody else was. So, in fact, there are certain people who are kind of introduced as characters in the story at the beginning of the book, and then somehow, in a field that's only 300 yards long, there's only 128 people on the site. I didn't see them for the next 7 days, and then suddenly at the end of the camp, oh, where have you been? Well, they've been off on their own adventures, and it's just like an amazing kind of microverse of infinite kind of different pathways that people are exploring. I don't know if that answered your...
Definitely, I'm just envious about your great meaningful experience. And
well, it was pretty crazy and traumatic at the time.
My life is so mundane, nothing really happens.
Well, well, I think the thing that I finished with, I think, is the fact that, I mean, well, no, it'll take me too long to find it, but there's a passage there where basically I kind of say something like that right up near the beginning, because there's there's an introduction about my ideas and how I got into this and stuff. And I had really been looking for something like this. I mean, really, really, really looking for something like this. I felt like, oh, you know, and so when this came along, I just knew, I thought, wow, this is an exciting adventure, you know. And over the years, I mean, there's lots and lots of things about, well, there was 2 more years, and if this is a success, you're going to get 2 more books, because I had similar but different adventures, inner adventures, what I call inner adventures, you know, my own drama, moving beyond my own sense of victimhood. And I don't think that's something I've emphasised enough, is that I think one of the problems in the world today is everybody feels like they're a victim, they're contained by, oh, you know, I don't know what to do, I'm at the mercy of the world. And of course we are constrained. When people talk about freedom, I really look back to an old statistical concept, which I can't know what it means. I can't remember what it means in statistics, but I think in human terms, the term degrees of freedom is far more meaningful than to talk about simple freedom, because you have to balance it with constraints in your material situation, and mental limitations. And if you can move beyond the mental limitation of seeing yourself as a passive victim of events, then you can gain a much greater sense of agency. I mean, this is the idea, to develop a sense of agency. I think there's something on the back cover here. I don't think I actually read this out, so I'll read it now. As the back page, top blur. What is the 100th monkey? Can we awaken it within ourselves? How do we move beyond a passive sense of victimhood and find the path which truly can lift us into a new paradigm? So this is, when I say it's a story of a rite of passage, in which I did go through what some would call the dark night of the soul. I mean, I really went through head-crushing, mind-numbing, self-disempowerment, and like, God, what's going on? And I just felt so crazy and so powerless and so silly and so weak and helpless and everything. But then I went through as a process of different, what Jungian would call different archetypes. So I experienced a process. I didn't get stuck in one, you know, thing, which is the victimhood thing. If we think, oh, I don't have any power, what can I do? Then you are going to be stuck. But if you, it's like what I was saying about this raising the quantum energy. If you say hard enough, you go looking for it, you know, and say to the universe, I really want to find more. And then you put a bit of energy into it and seek for more. And I mean, going and seeing Palden at the Friends Meeting House in Street Lane was one of those moments where it was a mixture of synchronicity and other things, but it just seemed sufficiently outside of the box to go and talk to somebody and to, oh yes, and because one of the things about Colin Jenkins was briefly mentioned is that he'd edited the first edition of this book called The Only Planet of Choice, which was about extraterrestrials. Now, the woman who had been mostly involved in producing this material, which is supposedly channeled, and you know that, and there's a lot of debate about this in the book, and I certainly don't accept the notion of channeling just as a complete carte blanche for anything, you know. But the group that produced the work for The Only Planet of Choice did seem to have quite good credentials, as well as the fact they're also connected to, well, one of their group was actually Gene Roddenberry, who was the creator of Star Trek. So he was obviously, you know, someone who had deep interest in these things, and I think sometimes a bit like Jules Verne. You know how people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, ideas that they had in the late 19th century sort of became standard kind of scientific concepts, you know, submarines, rockets to the moon, you know. So you could say that creative people with an imagination like Gene Roddenberry, on the one hand you could say, oh well, he's just making all this up because he wasn't actually the channeler, so he didn't, he wasn't involved in that. But I think at the same time you have to have an open mind to be a creative person, to create something as important and successful as.
Now, Claire, I just wondered, at what point, was it while you were in the camp or sometime afterwards that you decided to write a book about the experience?
Right. Well, it was a completely kind of mind-blowing tumble that I went through in the camp. And as I say, there were 2 more camps, and there were a few outside of camp. We met in the Peak District a couple of times. And I kind of mythologized, because people knew I'd kind of gone through this kind of experience, and there was 1 or 2 of them who'd always kind of rig me about it and things like that. And then I would just joke and I would say, oh well, when I write my book about the monkey camp, they'd all go, yeah, sure. And then, anyway, then the 3rd camp finished, and Paulden made it perfectly clear there were going to be 3 camps. We're going through a process of 3 camps, and we'd do that, and whatever came up, then there would be it'd be put aside, and it'd be kind of allowed to lie fallow and see what happened. And other people, we all went off and kind of did other things, but it obviously had a powerful impact on all our lives. So that by the time 3 or 4 years later came round, and I kind of lost touch with some of the people, and kind of the energy had gone away a little bit from it, and we were kind of moving on to other things. And I remember thinking in the summer of 2001, if I don't do something about this now, I'm going to lose the impetus. So I started writing on, I think it was August 25th, 2001, which was the 6th anniversary of the day I arrived at the campsite, because I always kind of got a big kind of buzz every year around that time when there was the anniversary and the energy of it. And I'm really, really glad that I started on that particular week, because of course we all know the world changed about 2 weeks later. And I've always thought, well, I'm just really, really glad that I started this on my own. It didn't have anything to do with that, because I could have, if I'd waited and then on September the 11th, if I hadn't got it started, there was a whole new train of energy that nobody, well, no, I say nobody, but the general population, us, had anticipated anything like this. And so it would have either distracted me so much, because we all had our minds blown, basically. So I probably it would have distracted me, or else if I had continued to go on, it would have in some way infected it, I think, and it would have affected the way that I approached it and everything like that. So I'm really glad that 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks before 9/11, I got started with this, and I sat down, and it took just years and years and years and years. But it just really felt like it's just something I had to do. And even though there was a time in around about 2006, 2007 when I actually kind of hadn't written anything for months, and I was thinking, God, will I ever get this finished? And other things were happening in my life, and but somehow I just managed to get back to it, and then the things which were distracting me around that time, I worked through them, and then I eventually came back to this, and I eventually finished it, and I went through it and reworked it about 5 or 6 times, and the other things took me away from it and everything. But I think the very fact that Paulden's willing to say on the back here, it's the only record of these events that exists, and I'm just so kind of happy and proud to have been able to make that contribution, because otherwise something as extraordinary as the 100th Monkey Camp would just sink without trace and be no more than a couple of pages on Paulden Jenkins' website, so it just, and it's also kind of amazing for me that we had a meditation. I'd say a bit more. I was going to say a bit more about this. We had a meditation about what it's going to be like 20 years in the future, and here we are 20 years in the future, and this is what it's like, which is kind of fun for me, you know. But one of the things is, I mean, one of the things about that meditation for 20 years in the future is that I think when I was going through for the final revision of the manuscript, it was just a few weeks ago, it occurred to me that it was a kind of humbling lesson on how our expectations of what's going to happen can so often be completely wrong. You know, if we you know, think that something's absolutely bound to happen, and we have, you know, and then the world just goes in a completely different kind of direction. So it was just quite humbling, you know. And there are a few interesting things, but I think it's people said about the, you know, what it would be like in 20 years in the future, but I think it's as much a reflection on ourselves. So all these things there all reflect back on our own interpretation and what we project on the world. Yes.
Did your meditations at the camp lead to any mystical experience?
I would say, to some degree, yes. Yes. Well, I myself had a rather unusual experience, which I don't really want to kind of detail here. Because just at that bit where I say I am the fool, that's just a few lines from a bit where I kind of went through. I was so bursting over with this energy of being upset, angry, and all kind of confused inside myself, that when a particular kind of opportunity came up, I kind of went through this kind of psychodrama, you know, in front of a tent full of people. It was kind of a bit intensely embarrassing at the time. I thought, what am I doing here? It was like it really was like some kind of archetypal being had kind of possessed me for a few seconds, and I said some strange things. I am the fool, you know. But this, to me, it was like, as I said before, I was kind of move through different archetypes, and going through an archetypal experiencing of seeing yourself as the fool, as in, you know, the tarot image of the fool, was in some ways profoundly liberating. Because the image of the fool is someone who is naive, stepping out blindly, you know, and kind of innocent, but at the same time, you know, precipitating. It could be stepping over a cliff or something, you know. And I'm quite sure that other people have various, but I can't obviously speak for them. But there was a trance medium at the site, and he kind of would come out with stuff from time to time. And again, I'm not trying to claim any of these things are absolutely what, you know, I don't know what these things are. There's a lot of discussion about, I do go through a lot of discussion about it as these things could well be, I mean, like I said about the Jungian experience about spaceships being manifestations of archetypal beings from our unconscious. They don't really have to be spaceships. 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, they might have seen them as angels, or you know, beings from the sky, or whatever. You know, so what a medieval person will just see as an angel, then, you know, we put into our own context. So I suppose, to some degree, I'm putting these things into a Jungian context, while at the same time I'm talking about the collective consciousness field, as in the way of those Rupert Sheldrake examples I was giving earlier. So you know, there's a degree to which you can make your own interpretation of it. I'm not trying to be doctrinaire or explain it all in one particular model. I mean, there are some aspects of this, particularly the problem of evil, which have come out from several different angles. Different people have different things to say about it. I felt that I was having evil projected on me. Not people were intending evil to me. What I mean is though that people thought I was evil. Ooh, you know, like, oh, Claire is a manifestation of evil, and oh, what do people think of me? So, you know, we often go through these things when the pressure becomes intense. That's the thing. Has anybody here read Dune?
Yeah.
Sorry?
A long time.
Right. Well, I don't think it happens until, I think it's in actually Dune Messiah, so I might be going a little bit beyond here. But one of the heroes of the book, Duncan Idaho, gets killed in the first book. Then he gets brought back to life by this advanced biological technology. But one of the things about this advanced biological technology is that people can't, when their people are resurrected, you know, in the tanks or whatever it is they put them in, they just become a kind of living robot. They don't have any memory left. However, what they discover is that when Duncan Idaho is put through some incredibly conflicting situation, where basically someone tries to get him to kill Muad'Dib, the emperor, his deep memories of who he really is get awoken by this conflict, because the people who are trying to control, anyway, so basically it's an intense conflict and it awakes him, and this is a really, really important recurring feature in the Dune books, that particularly since a lot of the background of the Dune books is about genetic memory, I should say, and the stresses and the pressures that are applied to people to get them to remember their genetic memories and remember their ancestors, because in a way this is the same kind of thing, whereby if you put under pressure, real extreme psychological pressure, then you have this conflict between just doing what social expectations and your normal ego have always, you know, programmed you to do, but then that's just a shell. You know, the persona, the Greek word persona, just means a mask. You know, we all have our masks that we wear. Again, this is a bit like the stage play, you know, so to really, and we can become too identified with our masks. You know, we can become that person who really never really changes, when actually deep inside us we've got something much more powerful. So this is the kind of alchemical transformation. I go into alchemy several times in the book, and the alchemical term vitriol, which means to visit the. It says translation means visit the interior of the earth, and by rectification you will find the philosopher's stone. And so what that really means is getting into your own unconscious material, visiting your own inner world, and rectification. That's like, you know, making it right. If you find that you've got some horrible fear or some demon inside you, which is a part of you. It's a fear that you have never conquered, and I have one of those in here, which I do manage to conquer. But it's quite a simple thing, really. But you can, these things, I suppose this is kind of like an art therapy approach, actually, is that when you can put these things inside you, and you can put them into some kind of image or name or label them, then you have much more power over them. And the medieval alchemists used to say that if you could name a demon, you had control over it. Whereas if it, you know, like you have words phrases from people like H.P. Lovecraft when they talk about nameless terrors and things like this, don't they? You know, and of course it's much. You know, to think, oh, a nameless terror. You know, but if you say no, that nameless terror is the evil Cthulhu from the dread dimension, you say, well, it's still terrifying, but you know, I know who he is. You know, so I'm not going to be frightened by him, or at least I'm going to stand up to him. And of course, when it's your own inner beings, your own inner fears, the things that you can't deal with, you know, we all run away from ourselves to a certain extent. And this is really, you know, it's about me running away from myself, but then coming, you know, going around in a circle. When you're on a campsite that's only 300 yards across, or 400 yards from one end to the other or something, it's very hard to get away from yourself.
Where in the world was the campsite?
It was just west of the Malverns and somewhat east of the Black Mountains, so quite close to the Welsh border. The bit on the map, it says Malverns.
The Golden Valley, somewhere in the Golden Valley.
It's very close, yeah, yes. But you're thinking of C.S. Lewis?
No, I was thinking of a bike ride I went on. But is it C.S. Lewis as well? Yeah. It's very nice place, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it took me a long time. In fact, some ways, it's really, you know, it's really kind of worked out well that it's taken so long to get this working out, because I took the template of that map off Google Earth, and it took me ages to find it. And for a long time I thought, I'm never going to be able to find it, or they cut the hedges down and it's a different shaped field or something. But I did get it in the end, and it finally worked out. And also I should say there are also 7 illustrations inside the book which I've made either from images of the camp, photographs that I have, or one or two imaginative examples, and that the map is inside front at the beginning of the book. So, how are we doing? Anybody else got any idea?
You mentioned the only planets of choice,
Yes.
which I've read about half of it, because that's
All
all I
right.
can understand.
Yes.
But I'm just interested to know how that influenced, you said that kind of influenced your the meditations.
Oh right, so I'm sorry, there's probably so many things here that I skim over some of them a little bit too quickly. Well, the thing is, the 9, who claim to be universal archetypal beings of some sort, and who some compare to the Ennead of ancient Egypt, which is an interesting concept, because the ancient Egyptian gods were 9, 3 triads of 3, so that's an interesting one. But they were giving this information, purportedly, through Phyllis Schlemmer, who well, she died a year or two ago, I believe. I did write to her when I first completed the manuscript to say, you know, I would like you to know that I've written this book about the 100th Monkey Camp, which was an idea that was suggested to Polden when he was doing the editing and commentary on the first volume. I have the first volume, the first edition. And I understand that the later editions, because each edition seems to have a different editor.
Oh, I didn't realise.
So, but I've only read the one which has edited by Polden, and he has commentary in it. I think some of the later editions have had, you know, different editing cuts, but perhaps no commentary. But he wasn't actually a part of the Roddenberry and Phyllis Schlemmer group, but he obviously had some quite close association with Phyllis Schlemmer and some of the other people in the group to be able to do the editing of the first edition, and because obviously there was a massive amount of material that had accrued over many years. I think they started back in the 60s, so there was about 20 years or so more. And so I imagine sifting through that must have been an immense task in itself. So he must have worked quite closely with Phyllis Schlemmer over this. And it's my understanding from Parliament, at least anyway, that as a result of this engagement with it, I'm not quite sure exactly how it was, but the idea of this camp came up because this is this type of meditation where you think about something and you try to just kind of gently engage with it without forcing anything onto it, you know. Is something that's mentioned in the Only Planet of Choice. So it's like showing some kind of psychic concern to people. It's like, you know, poking your head over the fence and saying, "Are you all right up there?" You know, to your neighbour perhaps. So then I believe he got some kind of encouragement. I'm not sure exactly what this was, but that doing this not just on an individual level, but on some kind of collective level, could have stronger consequences, I suppose. And obviously the idea is, you know, if you've got a group of people all working on the same project, then you can do it quicker than just the odd person, you know, here and there doing something. So I believe it was the outcome of quite a long time of you know, preparatory thought over the years that this took to make. Well, I'll just leave that there. Yes, it certainly. I mean, it did. The Only Planet of Choice did get quite a fanfare apparently when it was published in '93, and I had a very strange. I started talking about synchronicity at the beginning of the talk, but I had a very strange coincidence because the day after I met Paolo for the first time, you might have noticed the date was the 4th of November. The day after I went to a bonfire, and I think I told this story just the other day, and in the bonfire somebody had some crates, and out of this crate fell an image of the Vajradhara Buddha, I should say a bronze of the Vajradhara Buddha. Since I was the first person to notice it, and the person whose crates these were didn't mind, I think he was importing statues and things from India. So the very next day I got what I call as the Buddha of the Allotments by this Vajradhara Buddha, which is, I'd later discovered, that's the name of the Buddha from the particular design, and he's considered to be the Buddha of cosmic enlightenment, which is like flash of, a bit like Thor's lightning bolt or something like that. And it's kind of a bit like what happened to me. It's like what I was saying about how things, sometimes you have to have a little bit of a bump or have something knocked off you a little bit, but so that you can kind of wake up and think, what's going on? You know, who am I? What am I doing here? So that was a fun coincidence, having the Buddha turn up the next day after I met Paolo, you know. So how are we doing? Anybody else?
Puzzling about the relationship between the collective and the individual in relation to meditation.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, going back to the monkeys on the Japanese island, how many islands were there? Was there just a couple? Or?
I don't know. Well, what I read of is only the 2 islands, but I think there are other islands. I think there's a whole chain of islands with monkeys on them.
Did an individual monkey on the second island start doing it, and then all the others copy?
I believe so. Yes. So it was like a seed.
Yeah.
Which certainly an interesting idea. I mean, the idea is, you know, the way I understand it from Ken Keyes, who did this research in about 1960, was well, I mean, it could just be a complete coincidence, you know, but at the same time, if you're going to be working on principles of Jungian psychology, then you have to consider that, well, there is, you know, and Sheldrake has demonstrated, I believe, fairly conclusively, that there is this kind of universal field of consciousness. So if we have a world in which everything is just atoms and that's it, then it probably is just a coincidence. But if you have a world in which there is a kind of panpsychic, universal consciousness field, then it's almost inconceivable that there isn't some kind of connection. And I mean, again, the tension between the individual and the group collective is one of the things that I get into quite extensively here, because there is that tension. I don't think that it will ever go away, the tension between the individual and the group, and I think it's a dynamic tension which is creative. And I don't think that you should ever, that the group should, I don't think that the individual should ever be totally dominated by the group, and I don't think that the group should ever be totally dominated by the individual, because it's a two-way process. The group, it's like that bit, right, it's about the little grasshopper. We all, you know, it's where you chop, it's where you slice the boundaries as much as anything else, because
there was the request for an exercise here to meditate on world peace or something, and it was that phrase world peace that struck me, because it's so generic and so vague.
Yes.
Whereas I was raised in a tradition of Christian prayer where you pray very specifically, because at least you know what you mean.
Yes.
But what do we mean by world peace? And the interesting thing to me about Christian prayer is that I don't do it very often, but when I do, something happens, and it's startling how things happen.
Yes.
But how to relate that to a collective?
There was a short piece that I probably haven't got time to read now, but one of the slightly scary things that happened in the week, and I still find it slightly scary, is that we on the, I think it was the Monday of the week, we meditated on Bosnia at the time, Sarajevo. I'm sure everybody remembers it from the time, you know, Sarajevo, the shooting gallery, basically, wasn't it? And so we were meditating on Bosnia that morning, whichever morning it was. Later in the day, news came in with the bread delivery that while we had been meditating on Sarajevo, somebody, it later turned out it might have actually been the Bosnians themselves, blew up 18 or 20 people or something on the famous or infamous Bread Cube massacre, which eventually led to the NATO escalation and all that, and the end of it. But nonetheless, it was a pretty scary way for it to go. So that happened while we, as a group, 100 people or so in a circle, were meditating about Bosnia. And I find that kind of like, well, maybe somebody was, you know, how do you know that somebody in there wasn't, you know, putting out some negative thing, or that some sniper somehow felt some kind of psychic pressure, like there were too many people looking over his shoulder and he just got a bit twitchy or whatever, you know. So it does show that was the kind of real scary thing from the first camp, and I found myself thinking, well, this is something that we really need to be careful about, the intention that you do put out. Yeah. Oh, yeah, again, could just be a coincidence, but nonetheless, you know, it was a moment which changed the course of.
I do think it's a really valid point, and I think it is really important that when people get together as a group, that the focus is the same, and it's decided before you go into the quiet, you know, exactly what the focus is going to be. Because, I mean, you know, what Claire's just described is obviously a fascinating and quite scary example of what can happen. I mean, but it also proves something as well. It proves that, you know, this is, you know, there's this energy around us that affects all of us. you know, it affects the way we do things, the way we think, you know, and so on. And you know, everything that we put out each day, whether it's within our thoughts or our actions, it has an effect on the greater whole.
Well, it was certainly a meaningful, you know, a connection, and it might have been entirely acausal, as Jung suggests, but at the same time, you know, there might have been some interaction going on there because, you know, quantum entanglement at a distance is a recognised phenomenon. You know. So,
very interesting.
probably, how are we doing for time now?
Yeah, I think we will have to kind
Right,
of
okay,
wrap
well,
it
that's
up unless
great.
anybody's
Well,
got any burning questions.
Yes, well, thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah.
And I have 15 copies here for sale, and since this is the introductory thing, I'm letting them go for £3 below the £15 price. So available here, £12, and I'm very happy to sign any copies that anybody
Yes,
might buy.
That's great. Thanks
So
very
thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.